Well, hello, my friends. Welcome to episode 215 of Stand Up. Joining me today, MSNBC's Ali Velshi and anti-racist author and speaker Tim Wise. I am Pete Dominick. It's time to stand up with me right now. All right. Welcome to the show, to your day. How are you doing? I'm standing in the shed, the solar-powered former, well, I don't know why I say former. It's a Home Depot shed that we bought probably in 2008 or 9. That up until this summer it was my garden shed and became the studio. And that is where I've been standing each and pretty much every night. Right here recording the opening of the podcast, the interviews of the podcast, and you guys helped me build this. So thank you so much. The show is doing really well, but I always need you to help me promote it, and I'm welcoming you to the community that we are creating, or not. If you just want to listen to the show, that's cool too. Sorry to hit you over the head by constantly inviting you to hang out with us in our community and our Zoom hangouts, now on the Discord platform, but that's growing every day, and so is your support. So if you can subscribe to the show with a paid subscription, that would be awesome. It's $5 a month. It's the minimum, but you can subscribe for a lot more. And if you're subscribing for $5, I would love to have you pay more if you can to help support the show, because I got to keep building it to keep it sustainable. All right, now that is over, and it's always painful. I hate asking for your money. I hate that part of it, but this is a project that I am working full-time on, and I need your support because I'm also trying to support my family doing this, hosting this show every day. This is what I want my job to be. You guys have come through for me in such a big way, but for the program to be sustainable and to grow, and I'm not trying to build a Glenn Beck empire. I am trying to build a community, and we are, and I'm super proud of it. So many amazing people that have been involved and working hard to help out, from building the shed to building the website to building the graphics to lending any help that you can. The best thing you can do, of course, is subscribe to the show. So go to the paid subscription link on the show notes or patreon.com/Pete Dominick. We will be gathering tonight. It's tonight, right? Yeah. The debate here, Thursday, the 22nd. So go to patreon.com/Pete Dominick. If you're a subscriber, you should get this in the morning email. If you don't get a morning email, let me know. I'd be curious if you don't. Hopefully you appreciate it. It's not too annoying. I'm sure you wake up to quite a few morning emails if you're anything like me. And so you should have the link in there to join us for the hangout. I don't know what that will be, but it's just fun to be with all these faces and to be in the chat and to, from time to time, chime in and talk a bit before and talk a bit after. Getting everybody's reactions to it is always fun, as well as it just, to me, it's a lot more interesting and fun than watching television. Although we have people watching television and saying what was said on this network or that network or reading cool tweets. So it's a hangout. And I'm still not drinking, so I will not be, because of the first debate. I got so messed up. I decided I'm going sober October, and now it's 22 days. Anyway, can we talk just briefly about Wednesday, the 21st of October, 2020 in America, when, I don't know, it's hard to tell who won the day. Was it President Obama on the campaign trail in Philadelphia for Joe Biden and Kamala Harris, who I want to play a few clips from his very well-received speech, as awkward as it was because he's standing in front of a bunch of cars at like a drive-in. People weren't allowed to get in their cars. I've done stand-up that way now twice, and it's awful. But he did not seem thrown by it. He sold it. He did a great job, and I'll play clips. But did he win the day, or was it Trump and his personal attorney, Rudy Giuliani, whose reputation could potentially be set for even more damage if it's possible? Hard to believe this man's fall from grace, but he is still falling. And in the new Sacha Baron Cohen film, Borat, in case you hadn't heard, news travels fast these days, of course, on social media and cable news and 24-second news cycle. But his new film, released this Friday on Amazon, I believe. Is it Amazon? He's got Sacha Baron Cohen, the former mayor of New York, current personal attorney to Donald Trump, on video reaching into his pants, and what it looks like he's touching his dick while reclining on the bed in the presence of an actor, a young lady who is playing Borat's daughter but posing as a TV journalist as well. After she removes his microphone, according to The Guardian, Giuliani, 76. Jesus. 76-year-old man. My pop is 76, I think. He can be seen lying back on the bed, fiddling with his untucked shirt and reaching into his trousers. They are then interrupted by Borat, who runs in and says, "She's 15. She's too old for you." Representatives for Rudy Giuliani have not replied to The Guardian's request for comment, but Giuliani has, in fact, responded in a series of tweets. He said, I won't do the impression of him blabbering and spitting everywhere. Rudy said, "The Borat video is a complete fabrication. I was tucking in my shirt after taking off the recording equipment." And who amongst us does not lie down on their bed to tuck their shirt in? That's the only way I tuck my shirt in, is while lying down. One time my shirt came untucked while I was outside walking down the sidewalk. So I lied down on the sidewalk and I tucked it in because it's the only way to get it in there for me. So I think that's totally normal. Rudy went on to say, at no time during or after the interview was I ever inappropriate. If Sacha Baron Cohen implies otherwise, he's a stone cold liar. Rudy Giuliani calling people liars is rich. In the next tweet, he writes, "In fact, the New York Post today reports, quote, 'It looks to me like an exaggeration through editing. As soon as I realized it was a setup, I called the police,' which has been noted in the article on July 8th. Which is true. He did. He reported this. We heard about this back in July. But now we see the video. So we heard Rudy's version of events. And I think there were photos of Sacha Baron Cohen running down the street in New York, if I have that right. Finally, he went on to say, "This is an effort to blunt my relentless exposure of the criminality and depravity of Joe Biden and his entire family. Deadline Hollywood reports CAA had a distribution screening in September where there was no mention of the scene holding any importance." And finally, Rudy said, "We are preparing much bigger dumps of the hard drive from hell, of which Joe Biden will be unable to defend or hide from. I have the receipts." And then he turned into a bat and flew out the window. All right, we're all going to see the video of Rudy Giuliani, and it's going to be really rough and really funny, and we're going to talk about it a lot probably, and it's just insane that Borat has brought down Rudy and, by extension, Donald Trump. But I mean, it's who won the day is how I started this. Who won the day? Was it Obama and Biden-Harris in Philadelphia and progressive Democrats or non-cult Trump people? Or was it Trump and Giuliani with this video that everybody is talking about? All right, so President Obama was in Philadelphia, and most of the speech, I highly recommend that you listen or watch the whole thing. You can find it anywhere. Just Google Obama Philadelphia. I was thinking about putting it on the end of this podcast, and maybe I still will if I have time. But it's a great speech, and it was very well received yesterday. President Obama on the campaign trail, and it's hard, the campaign trail, to be on because everybody's socially distanced and masked. You got to protect the president and, former president and all the security issues. So there he is on stage in Philly, and there's a bunch of cars there, and it's like a drive-in, and people stay in their cars, and they react with horns. This happened when I did stand-up in the parking lot a couple times. I think I briefly mentioned that earlier. So it's awkward as hell, but Obama, it's mostly really inspiring, and I'll play those parts for you. But he does take shots. He really starts it's open season on Trump for Obama. He's been waiting and holding his fire rhetorically, and he really unleashed on him. And here is one of my favorite clips. This is President Obama talking about the New York Times revelations that Trump has a bank account in China.
We know that he continues to do business with China because he's got a secret Chinese bank account. How is that possible? How is that possible? A secret Chinese bank account. Listen, can you imagine if I had a secret Chinese bank account when I was running for re-election? You think Fox News might have been a little concerned about that? They would have called me Beijing Barry.
He's writing the jokes for Trump, and he's just nailing it right there. I absolutely loved President Obama being his authentic self and using his ability to do stand-up, to do straight-up jokes, slaying. Here is more in this clip. The best president of our lifetime touts the relationship he has with Joe Biden and Kamala Harris, and then rips the worst president of our time at the end. I love this little soundbite I baked up for you.
For 8 years, Joe was the last one in the room when I faced a big decision. He made me a better president, and he's got the character and experience to make us a better country. And he and Kamala are going to be in the fight, not for themselves, but for every single one of us. Look, I get that this president wants full credit for the economy he inherited and zero blame for the pandemic that he ignored.
Yes, and that's the best, most important point. He ignored it. He said it would, like a miracle, go away. He said it was affected hardly anybody. Come on, he has ignored it. It's not that he made the wrong choices, supported the wrong policies, appointed the wrong people, although, of course, he's done all of those things, too. He ignored it. Well said, former awesome president. Great to hear from you. And I've got more from President Obama. Here he is talking up the Affordable Care Act, which, thank goodness it's there. When I lost my job at SiriusXM, I've been able to get an affordable policy for my wife and I because of the subsidies, and my daughter's on what's called New York Plus, thanks to the Medicaid expansion, which is really good coverage. It's not great. It's not as good as I had in private corporate media insurance policy. Better than what was available had I lost my job before Obamacare, like so many other people did.
Republicans love to say right before an election that they'll protect your pre-existing conditions. Now, Joe and I actually protected your policies to make sure people with pre-existing conditions could get health insurance and have coverage. We did it through something called the Affordable Care Act, a.k.a. Obamacare.
Yeah, he loves it because he loves touting it because it saves so many lives. He's proud of it, and it's got a great high approval rating now.
Republicans tried to repeal or undermine it more than 60 times. And when they've been asked about it, they keep on promising, we're going to have a great replacement. They said, it's coming. It's been coming in 2 weeks for the last 10 years. Where is it? Where is this great plan to replace Obamacare? They've had 10 years to do it. There is no plan. They've never had one. Instead, they've attacked the Affordable Care Act at every turn, driving up costs, driving up the uninsured. Now they're trying to dismantle your care in the Supreme Court as we speak, as quickly as they can, in the middle of a pandemic.
Lays it out perfectly for people to understand the circumstances of exactly what they're doing. And he had so much more trust and credibility and obvious moral clarity that when he says these things, you tend to listen a little closer, I think, I think I'm speaking for a lot of Americans, not all Americans, maybe not most Americans, but a lot of us, when we hear him lay it out that way, it has a lot more weight, and he has such a personal stake in it because, of course, that's the work that he worked so hard to accomplish in his legacy. All right, I'll stop talking.
With nothing but empty promises to take its place. It's shameful. The idea that you would take health care away from people at the very moment where people need it most, what is the logic of that? There is no logic. Joe knows that the first job of a president is to keep us safe from all threats, foreign, domestic, or microscopic.
Oh, really good point. He nails it there. And then he goes on, takes several digs at President Trump by saying, you have no idea how to do the job you are so privileged to have. No care about it. Well, I'll tell you how to do it and how Joe will do it. Listen to this.
When the daily intelligence briefings flash warning signs about a virus, a president can't ignore them. He can't be AWOL. Just like when Russia puts bounties on the heads of our soldiers in Afghanistan, the commander-in-chief can't be missing in action. I can tell you this. Joe Biden would never call the men and women of our military suckers or losers.
Oh, you really wanted him to go there. You really wanted Obama to bring that up and accuse Trump of saying that because, of course, we know he said that, and he said it obviously publicly several times about John McCain. Most people don't know this, but President Obama and Michelle Obama did a lot for veterans and their families. It was one of Michelle Obama's key initiatives, working with veterans' families. And, of course, President Obama is the one who gets a lot of credit for the salary increases and so much more benefits that many, of course, veterans got as a result of him. President Trump constantly talked about decimating, that they decimated the military. They did not. They built it up, and he has only added to its ridiculous budget for the Pentagon. All right.
Who does that? He knows these heroes are somebody's children, somebody's spouse, somebody's dad or mom. He understands that. And he's going to restore our standing in the world because he knows that America's true strength comes from setting an example that the world wants to follow. A nation that stands with democracy, not dictators. A nation that can mobilize and inspire others to overcome threats like climate change and terrorism and poverty and disease. And with Joe and Kamala at the helm, you're not going to have to think about the crazy things they said every day. And that's worth a lot. You're not going to have to argue about them every day. It just won't be so exhausting. You might be able to have a Thanksgiving dinner without having an argument. You'll be able to go about your lives knowing that the president is not going to retweet conspiracy theories about secret cabals running the world or that Navy SEALs didn't actually kill bin Laden. Think about that. The president of the United States retweeted that.
I love that. I love the way that he says that, goes up in pitch, because it is so preposterous that we're living through this, that the president did that. And now the president kind of loses his normal ability to articulate so eloquently, because he, like so many of us, goes off the script here and struggles to find the words to describe the behavior of Donald Trump. But then he gets back on track, and man, does he finish with a very important flourish about the role of the president and the character of the president and why it matters. Listen to this.
Imagine. What? We're not going to have a president that goes out of his way to insult anybody who doesn't support him or threaten them with jail. That's not normal presidential behavior. We wouldn't tolerate it from a high school principal. We wouldn't tolerate it from a coach. We wouldn't tolerate it from a coworker. We wouldn't tolerate it in our own family, except for maybe crazy uncle somewhere, you know. He's I mean, why would we expect and accept this from the President of the United States? And why are folks making excuses for that? Oh, well, that's just him. No. There are consequences to these actions. They embolden other people to be cruel and divisive and racist. And it frays the fabric of our society. And it affects how our children see things. And it affects the ways that our families get along. It affects how the world looks at America. That behavior matters. Character matters.
Behavior matters. Character matters. And reading from The Guardian yesterday, even before he reaches into his trousers, Giuliani does not appear to acquit himself especially impressively during the encounter. Flattered and flirtatious, he drinks scotch, coughs, fails to socially distance, and claims Trump's speedy actions in the spring saved 1 million Americans from dying of COVID. He also agrees, in theory at least, to eat a bat with his interviewer. Yeah, behavior matters. Character matters. Rudy Giuliani, President Trump's personal attorney, is doing everything he can to damage the reputation of Joe Biden, credibility of Joe Biden, with all kinds of crazy conspiracy theories and intelligence that a lot of people think came directly from Russia. Anyway, I just think that the last part of Obama's speech mattered a lot. I really like that ending. I think that is so important, and I think that is the most important part of Barack Obama's presidency, is the way that he carried and conducted himself as a black man, as a black family man, as the father of daughters, as a man, as a mixed race man, as a man who has lived in different parts of the world and has had all kinds of different experiences, as a curious man, as a passionate man, as a comforting man, as how a man should treat his mother-in-law who lived with him in the house the whole time. I think that is who we see and who we look back on, and the disparity between that man and the man that replaced him is so stark and so dramatic for so many of us every day. And to hear Barack Obama speak is to feel a certain sense of comfort and reality and hope that we can somehow come somewhere close to redeeming our pick up kind of where he left off, although it's so hard to imagine how much damage has been done. But now I just think that we should take the happiness wherever it comes. And a lot of people were inspired by hearing the former president speak and say the things that he said and talk about the role of the president, why Joe Biden, Kamala Harris will be great, and why Donald Trump is such a dipshit, which is he really didn't pull his punches, and he's been trying to stay out of the fray, obviously, but that's over with 2 weeks left, and we've been waiting. And if it were a normal campaign, you know, he'd be out there everywhere, and maybe he will be. Maybe we'll be hearing from President Obama a lot. That'd be great. I think that'd be really helpful. But one guy on Twitter I saw, I don't know who this is, but he says, I suppose it's not a guy thing to admit, but I actually had tears in my eyes watching Obama give a speech in Philadelphia today. We all long to return to a time when we can have the peace of mind that comes from competent leadership. And I just quoted a tweet. I was just like, don't be ashamed of the tears in your eyes because you're a man. Emotions like that are a sign that you're a good person. Be proud. # real men cry. I always want to take every opportunity to express that to all the fellas out there listening, many of which I've gotten to know and talk with. Had an amazing conversation with this guy, Michael Acevedo, yesterday. Michael, hopefully you're listening to this, because great guy who's been a great friend to me, who I still never met, but he's a longtime listener of the show. And I just think it's so important for men especially to stay connected as we get older in our 40s and 50s. A lot of us find ourselves very alone, and we can be kind of ashamed of that because we have a lot of friends. And growing up, we were always had good relationships, a lot of relationships. Now maybe many of them have withered, and maybe we're trying to figure out what our purpose should be now as our kids are getting older or whatever it is. there's a lot of loneliness for middle-aged guys, and I've talked about that. I've read about that. I've interviewed experts about that. It can be fatal, and the pandemic makes it so much more difficult to be connected and stay connected. So I welcome you to our community. I hope that you will join us there, because there's a lot of certainly tons of women from all kinds of diverse backgrounds and ages, and amazing, impressive women who have really helped me become a better person, but a lot of great guys as well who are connecting and learning more about each other and helping each other. So stay connected. That's where I start my conversation, by the way, with Ali Velshi, who is my first guest. Two amazing guys, two amazing conversations, in my opinion, today. I hope that you will listen to both of them. If you got to stop, please come back and finish both these conversations. I found them so enlightening and so important, and really helped me stay grounded, connected, and inspired by both Ali Velshi and Tim Wise. Ali Velshi, of course, is the anchor of Velshi, which airs at 8 to 10 a.m. Saturday and Sunday now on MSNBC. I met him when we were both working at CNN, where he was the everyman. He did every job. He does the same thing at MSNBC. You see him in every time slot. He's a very good personal friend of mine. I like him a lot. It's always great to catch up with Ali Velshi about, well, anything, which is exactly what we did in this conversation. Here it is. Ali Velshi joins me now, and I'm really excited to see you. We've been talking for a few minutes, and it's always good to just catch up with you, buddy. It's a relief to just connect and hear how you're doing.
We used to do it more in real life, and I miss it. And may we do it again.
Yeah, I mean, but you used to do that, and you still do that in real life with people when you walk past them at work, I'm sure, when you're at work at MSNBC. Are you getting any of that hallway talk in your life? Or are you almost always remote?
I'm almost always remote. I am in rarely. I went in the other day because for election night, I'll be there, or the day after the election, I'll be there doing that board that I operate. Steve Kornacki also does. So I was in there for some training, and I was so excited to be back there. But there's nothing normal about it, because most people are not back there, and it's not a normal environment. So I really miss that interaction, and I have been getting a lot of it because I'm on the road every week. And I love that. I love it largely because of the implications of it. I'm actually talking to people in the most important election in our lifetime.
Right when I asked you that, are you getting that hallway talk? I realized right when I asked you, I'm like, wait, this guy's been on the road for how many, 8 weeks now?
So I'm not in the office much, but at least
I just want to say, like, I just want to blow some smoke up your ass right now and say it's like award-winning programming what you're doing. I from the segments that you're doing with all of these voters in a number of states. You've been to, my notes say, Pennsylvania, Minnesota, Colorado, Michigan, Ohio, Wisconsin, and Arizona, and you're going to be going to North Carolina. The videography in Arizona was beautiful. Yeah. I mean, and every element of the show is great. We're learning a lot. Yeah. Usually I like to criticize cable TV simply because of the spectacle of it and that the segments are too short. And that's why I love getting to talk to you like this. But the show has been great as you travel. Talk about what you're doing. Velshi across America. And then I have a bunch of specific questions about what you learn in each place.
So there are a couple of takeaways. One is I'm finding 6 people in each place. In theory, 2 are Republicans, 2 are Democrats, 2 are independents. Doesn't always work out that way. I'm not really trying to be representative. I'm just trying to get a bunch of people who share.
Your bookers should get an award for finding those people.
Bookers are amazing on this. But here's the takeaway. These people have strong views, and they tell the bookers because we pre-interview them, right? When they are together, the natural instinct for humans, regardless of their political background, is not to be nasty, impolite attack dogs. They listen to each other. They actually sometimes come away with the idea that, wow, your shared experience, your lived experience is not mine. And I believe what I believe, but I don't walk in your shoes. So maybe I should listen more than I talk. And I'm getting a lot of that. I'm getting people, particularly conservatives, who said to me, my family was afraid about what would happen if I came here. I've watched you on TV. I was afraid you were going to rip me apart. And I said, I'm just here to listen. Just let's talk to each other. Let's see what shared experiences we do have, because we do breathe the same air. We are all exposed to the same virus. And I'm finding that it feels like a road for me, Pete. It feels like if we can emulate this and we can scale this, maybe we can get back to something that feels like normalcy. I'm not looking for everybody to agree. I'm not looking for everybody to share views, but boy, can we listen? Can we not yell? Can we not name call? Can we not invalidate people's experiences? And I feel like we've made some headway with that. I mean, look, me talking to 6 people a week is not changing the world. But you do this. You go out of your way to talk to people. You think it's important to listen to people. You feel that people feel good for being heard. I think the American voter is the same way. I think everybody feels good for being heard.
Yeah, but I agree with you, and I think that what you have always done is bring people together, and you've always been respectful. I think everybody knows your reputation. You're not a flamethrower. You're not actually trying to make the Ali Velshi brand and be the king of all media and make millions and millions of dollars the way a Hannity or a Rush or Glenn Beck have. And you're actually trying to, you're purposeful and you're trying to bring people together. But the problem still is us. It still is media, people who make a living in quote media, and media is everything now. And that you're always going to get more clicks, more views, and sell more ads by being scarier and being more. Yeah. And I don't see that changing. I have this radical idea that a Joe Biden or a Democratic president goes on Hannity like every night and confronts his bullshit that he's saying about him or addresses it in a more direct way. But I see the media leading divisiveness because it's the best way to get a lot of followers, subscribers, and make money.
It is, and that's true. But we can decide as consumers not to, right? We can. My problem is that I ask people before I meet, my bookers ask them where they get their news from. We ask people to keep it a safe space. You can say whatever you want, but understand that you're sharing the space with people. And I ask people specifically, when I ask them a question, I'm traveling across the country to get their opinion on it, whether it's abortion or social justice or their opinion. I don't want a party line. I don't want anything that sounds like it came out of an ad or off of Fox or off of MSNBC. I want to know how it affects them. When I ask them about the American dream, I want to know very personally, what is the American dream to you? When I ask them this about the Supreme Court, I'm not quizzing them on Amy Coney Barrett. I'm asking them what the Supreme Court means to them, what the influence is on them. And if we can train people again to speak from their own experience, to speak from their own heart and not mimic nonsense that they hear on radio or on cable TV, we have hope. There is a possibility that we might actually enter into dialogue.
Well, I want to ask you one specific question just to kind of about what you're learning and get a kind of a policy answer, which I know you'll give me, and then specifically ask some of what you learned in the number of states that you've traveled to. But one of the guys that you talked to who's voting for Trump in Arizona this past weekend on your show, which everybody should – all the show notes are links to it, but on MSNBC at weekdays 8 to 10 East a.m. So is that this guy talks about – we've heard this, we've all been told this. In America, if you work hard and you do the right thing, you can get ahead. And we have been told that story, and it is a huge canard. And the data belies that. And you talked to other people who talked about the opportunities that they've had with education and healthcare and so on. Why is it that America, talk to me about the economic ideas and data that says America actually isn't the place to get ahead, at least anymore, compared to several other countries, including your homeland, Canada.
Right. In Canada, and that's true. In Canada and Northern Europe and some Western European countries, the things that cripple you in America don't happen to you because you are not paying nearly as much for an education, a good education. You are not paying, in most cases, anything for healthcare. And that's an unfair thing to say because obviously things get paid through taxes, but it won't bankrupt you. If you lose your job or you got cancer, the two things independently won't bankrupt you. In America, those two things will kill you literally and financially. What the problem is, and the way to think about this is the idea of America is amazing, right? The idea of our founding documents, the things that we want to be true are fantastic. But the practicality of making those things true has escaped us. And that's okay. It will escape us. That's part of growth, right? When people increasingly say, let's make this a more perfect union, not perfect, but let's just make it better than it is already. There are people in America who believe we have achieved that perfection, that equality of opportunity. And the lived experience of other people, and when I say other people, I mean women who don't get paid what men do, women who are subject to harassment, African Americans who break out into a sweat when a police officer, when lights go on or they encounter a police officer, lesbian and gay people, everybody everybody's lived experience is what it is. And we cannot continue to invalidate that because we have documents that say otherwise. We do have documents that say otherwise. We have a constitution that says all men are created equal. Doesn't talk about women, but it does say that we're all equal, even though the moment that was signed, that was not true in America. So we have to just come to terms with the idea that the thing you think this is, which is a great thing, is not necessarily the thing that it is, but it doesn't mean it can't become that thing.
Well, for it to
listen to other people.
That's a great answer. But for it to become a thing, you and I have talked about and even argued at times about certain economic policies. And for me to even be in an argument with you about these things is hilarious. But I know a couple things. I'm 2 minutes. I got 2 minutes worth of arguments and you have 10. But we've talked about things like minimum wage and the role of organized labor and how to make the economy better and create more opportunities for everybody. But what are you hearing from voters and journalists when we talk about just the right to vote, as you just touched on there? We can't argue about economic policy if we have to argue about access to the ballot, which you've covered extensively.
And we have a political party, a major political party in America that seems to be engaged in making it difficult for people to vote. What's up with that? It's 2020. So there's a reckoning that has to happen amongst people who may not believe what America really is. And then there's another reckoning to be had to say you're being lied to. And some things are not partisan, right? We can actually argue about whether there should be a minimum wage or not. And I'm happy to take up my end of that argument. We're not arguing about whether everybody should be allowed to vote and whether we should be encouraging everybody to vote. That's just not an argument we should be having in 2020. And if we are, someone's lying to someone. So that's part of the problem. I have run into people who, while they would probably say to me, and when I say run into, these are people I've interviewed in these trips across America, they probably would tell you they don't believe in QAnon or don't subscribe to QAnon. But when I asked two Republicans in Kenosha what the number one issue was to them that they think the president needs to confront, child sex trafficking. Now, it's a tough argument because I agree that's a really big thing. We should all be on exactly the same side of this thing. But you've been fooled into thinking that this is somehow the biggest issue in America right now.
Where are you on the record, Elie Velshi, on child trafficking? Pros, cons?
Believe it or not, as a member of the media, because according to QAnon, the media and Democrats are not only just child sex traffickers and pedophiles, but cannibals. I mean, people believe this nonsense.
It's a horrible issue, and there's so much gradation to it. There's so many questions about it, and what are we even talking about? But the theories and beliefs that they have, and putting it, what you're saying is put it in at the top. It's like, if we're talking about public health.
Also, it devalues it because it's actually a real problem that we should all be dealing with. But when you go around and say that Bill Gates is a pedophile and Tom Hanks is a pedophile and all these people that they name, well, then you know what? Like you've taken away from the idea that there are pedophiles, there is child sex trafficking, and it's an issue that we should all deal with, and it shouldn't be partisan at all. But this is the kind of stuff, and there are candidates running for office who will win. There are probably 24 candidates who are outward supporters of conspiracy theories and QAnon or white supremacy or things like this. Some of them will win. There's a woman in Georgia who will win. The woman running in the district in which Donald Trump's Mar-a-Lago is a crazy conspiracy theorist, Laura Loomer.
Right.
And this is where the Republican Party and very conservatives have to say, this is nonsense. Just stop.
She's also terribly anti-Islamic and bigot. I mean, she's not just a major conspiracy theory. Yeah. So, I mean, I wonder in your travels if there's any way for you to get a sense of what percentage of Trump supporters, or I mean, I don't really even use the word Republican anymore, but Trump supporters also buy into or on the periphery of a lot of these conspiracy theories. It's such a hard thing. There's a lot of really interesting journalism being done around it, as well as experts and, psychologists and cult experts and so on. What is the sense that you get about what percentage of Trump supporters are also buying into some of the craziest stuff? And he's the one saying it. So it's like, if you trust him, he's actually tweeting it and saying it.
So the line is fuzzy, right, between conservatives, Republicans, Trump supporters. But I was okay with that line being fuzzy. Now we've got another fuzzy line about white nationalists, militia members, white supremacists, anti-Semites, Islamophobes, QAnon people, and conspiracy theorists. And the whole thing starts to get fuzzy. So as a consumer of news, you have to be able to say, I draw the line. I am a conservative. I believe in small government. I think I can spend my money better than the government can spend my money. Those are all sort of old-fashioned conservative values. Maybe I like a strong military. Maybe I'm maybe I'm like Rand Paul, and I don't think our military should be involved in other people. Those are all things worth discussing. But you can't be playing footsie with these other people. Like at some point you have to say, I can't play footsie with conspiracy theorists, liars, Islamophobes, anti-Semites, white nationalists. The problem is the president himself blurs those lines.
What does it do when Savannah Guthrie asked him about tweeting specifically? I'm really hooked on this one tweet where he tweeted out that maybe bin Laden hadn't been killed and there was a body double. And of course, the Navy SEAL who killed him was outraged, as was all special forces, because this is what they do, and you're the president of the United States taking away what we've done. But he did this with Ted Cruz, too, during the primary.
Yep.
He put out this crazy, I mean, just crazy idea that Ted Cruz's dad was involved in JFK assassination. His defense for it to Savannah Guthrie is, I'm just putting it out there. What's your reaction to when he just...
the United States? So I'm not the president. You're not the president of the United States. And yet if you did something that irresponsible, people would take you to task, Pete, because you've got followers on Twitter. You've got people listening to this podcast. I have viewers. When you influence anything, you have greater responsibility. Because you can cause people to think a certain way or do certain things. So can I. He really can. He's the leader of a party and the president of the United States and ostensibly the leader of the free world. So you can't just put out there that maybe bin Laden wasn't killed, or maybe it was a body double, or maybe the SEAL Team 6 didn't do their job. But that's just a piece of it. He keeps retweeting these ridiculous conspiracy theories. So does his family. And they support these conspiracy theory candidates. So at some point, when does this conservative idea that you had become disconnected from the fact that this guy doesn't represent any of them? And that's what I'm finding difficulty in engaging people in conversation with, because they're not registering that. They're saying he wanted to drain the swamp. He's not an insider. He was going to close his border in Arizona. He made that border wall. He's kept his promises. It's like, but what about all this other stuff you can't have the president of the United States doing?
You know what's crazy is that you hear things from people that you trust and sources all the time, and you may say, you know what, I bet you that's true about that person or about that thing. I wish I could tell everybody, but I can't because I'm not positive.
Sourced properly.
I'm not positive that it's true, so I can't.
Correct.
Even though I think it is.
Most people have that sense about them, right? Most people, regular people who only have their friends to talk to. But here's the problem. Facebook made us all into broadcasters of sorts.
Yep.
So this standard, and we have a standards and practices department at NBC, as do most major networks, in which they sometimes challenge you. If there's something you're going to say or did say on TV, they'll say, where'd you get that from? Where's that information? Can I get the source documents from it? And some of us journalists find that annoying sometimes, but they save us from ourselves. But now when you can put things out there, nonsense, and have it retweeted, and Facebook and Twitter are tearing out their hair trying to figure out how they manage this stuff, but it's out there. It's a megaphone. And I'm meeting the people on the other end. I'm meeting the people who hear it and believe it.
You are, but you've also been a target of the president's, and I definitely want to ask you about that. I'm sure you've been asked about it, and I'm sure you've talked about it. And I know that you're a modest guy, and like I said, you haven't ever wanted to make yourself the story, but you become the story when you are reporting as you were in Minneapolis, and you got shot as you did by a rubber bullet by the police officers there, and then at some point during the campaign, the president himself called you out, and more than once, and I think also maybe on social media. And I want to just play it for people, like to remind people if they didn't hear it.
I remember this guy Welshi. He got hit on the knee with a canister of tear gas, and he went down. He didn't. He was down. My knee. Nobody cared. These guys didn't care. They moved him aside, and they just walked right through. It was like. It was the most beautiful thing.
Where were you when you found out that he said that? How did it affect you? And what is the bigger, broader lesson, if any, to learn?
Well, if it weren't about me and if it weren't untrue, I'd say he's a good storyteller. The story he tells is much more interesting than what actually happened to me. I took this rubber bullet to my knee. He calls it a gas canister. I didn't go down. I said, oh, shit, I'm hit. And my cameraman, who's really had experience in war zones, quickly tilts the camera to me. He had the camera on the police who were shooting, tilts it to me, registers that, my hand's on my knee, and goes away. Never went down. Nobody did anything about it. But he tells the story, and he started telling it like 2-3 months after it happened. He's still telling it. He was telling it last week again.
Oh, really?
And it's just become part of his Catskills shtick, right? And he's not a comedian like you.
How dare you put down Catskills comics?
But
it's true. It is a
bit. The problem is he has all sorts of different versions of the story he tells, and I'm not troubled by most of them. I'm troubled by the first time he said it, when he described it in great detail and talked about what a beautiful thing it was, and then tied it to the media in general. And I thought to myself, that's not what we believe America is. That's not the First Amendment. That's not got anything to do with politics. There were some reporters from the Daily Caller who were arrested in Louisville. And I tweeted out my support of them. Daily Caller's never said anything nice about me. We don't share views on anything, but they are members of the media and should not be arrested by the police, right? That's not politics. The media must be left to do its job because, as the Washington Post says, democracy dies in darkness. When our lights go out, you can't see the story. So you and I have had this conversation many times. We only have two responsibilities as journalists: bear witness, tell people it's happening, and hold power to account. You cannot hold power to account if you cannot bear witness. If you can't see it happening, you can't tell people anything about it. That's why we were in the streets of Minneapolis. That's why we were there. That's why our cameras were rolling when the police pulled into an intersection and opened fire on a 100% peaceful crowd. I was there. Donald Trump wasn't. And so the only part of that bothers me is questioning the right of the media to do what it does. I don't care about the fact that he exaggerated about the story. That's fine. But we must be allowed to do our job, whether you like us or not. It's
a great answer. I should have grabbed the clip. I grabbed the wrong one when he said it's a beautiful thing because, and it must have been, I don't know what word we would use, but it must have been heartwarming when you saw pretty much everybody you've ever worked with and people you haven't, and maybe we were surprised by, coming to your defense, because It's not a beautiful thing when a journalist gets shot.
Correct. And a lot of people were saying nice things about me.
Right.
Ali's a nice guy. And while I really appreciate it, fundamentally, the issue is whether I'm a nice guy or not, whether you like me or not.
Exactly.
This is our First Amendment. And listen, this is something America should take very seriously. And every one of us should not want this to happen, because once they start telling this group of journalists to look away or arrest them or can't do it, who knows when it'll become the other group that you happen to like. Journalists must be left free to do their work. And I will say this to you, when I got hit, I don't think anybody was targeting me. I don't know better. A lot of journalists were hit by police over that few days. There were more than 200 instances. Somebody lost their eye from a rubber bullet. I don't believe somebody said, "There's Velshi, let's shoot at him." It was inadvertent, I believe. I was in a riot, not a riot. Well, it wasn't a riot. Actually, it was a peaceful march. Trump calls it a riot. I was in a peaceful march, but it was not a march that the police wanted to happen because there was a curfew.
What do you think?
Not between people and the police.
I really appreciate all of that answer. I think it's really important, and I'm sure that's not something that you love talking about. But what do you think about when the president pivots when being asked about white supremacy to Antifa? In the wake of, and you were just in Michigan, what has happened, the plot and threat on the governor of Michigan's life, and what you and I have both seen and talked with experts about for years, and you've been unfortunately even a target of, the hatred for anything brown, anything Muslim. This is a major, major threat, according to every national security expert. I talked with our friend Ali Soufan about this last week. So when you hear him kind of equivocate between Antifa and white supremacy, I want to get your analysis of why that is probably not parallel.
Yeah, I mean, one of these things is real and illegal. Antifa is largely an idea that we've not been able to identify. We don't get them on video. Like if they're for such a force, we can't really find them. There is a distinction between people who are protesting social justice and some idea called Antifa. And there's a continuum there. These militias, there's no division. These are militias. They are anti-government. For some reason, some of them like Donald Trump because they think he's anti-government too. But generally speaking, they're against the government. They are illegal. You're not actually permitted, as Ali Soufan told you, to engage in anything that you think might be law enforcement activity, including protecting people and property. That's the job of the police. And if the governor activates you, of the National Guard. They're not the same thing. You cannot like the idea of Antifa. That's fine. But when we're talking about white nationalists, when we're talking about illegal militias, the president of the United States needs to be unequivocal about it. And he's never done that. He's always equivocated about it since Charlottesville. There are lots of people who tell you the media has quoted him out of context. We run the whole thing. The point is, we should not be in a place where we're parsing the president's words about whether or not he sort of gave a wink and a nod to armed extremists, militias, people like that.
if I did a better show and had a producer and or more time, I would grab clips from your show and get your reaction to them. But because I don't have those resources, I just want to get your take on what you've learned, or maybe just pick out some of the people that you talk to in Velshi across America. Like I said, you've been traveling to all these. What do you guys call them? What is editorial? Swing states, battleground?
We're calling them swing states. We sometimes call them battleground. I don't like the imagery as much.
So you've been to...
I'd like to stop thinking about politics as a battle.
Right. Well, I'd love to play those clips. I don't have them. Can you provide me some of the experiences, something that you might have learned that surprised you, warmed your heart, or even scared you when talking to voters?
Yeah. So one of the things we do is we let it breathe a little bit. We let these conversations run.
I like that.
And my main takeaways are largely what happens at the end with people who say, I don't agree with any of you, but I'm so grateful that you're here for the conversation. Or people who tell me my family was worried that, if I came here and talked to MSNBC, bad things would happen to me. Or a woman who told me in Pueblo, Colorado, I've watched clips of you and I was really regretting agreeing to come here because I've heard you debating people. And I said, I'm not here to debate. I'm just here to listen to you. And I'm really just here to hear you all talk to each other. And so I'm truly heartened. And I got to tell you, Pete, you and I have talked over the last few years. I've been disheartened by what's happened in America. And I've been really saddened and really worried. And yet when I go out, I generally come back feeling stronger. Every time I'm out there talking to these Americans, I come back thinking we have the capacity to listen, to empathize, to validate. We're not doing a great job of it. But we have the capacity. We still have the capacity to do it. And the right leadership could help us, because 4 years ago, I would have told you the president doesn't matter that much. But COVID and social justice movements changed that for me, that we realize what the leadership, the moral leadership actually means. And more than moral leadership, the actual leadership means.
Well, I mean, people are just not assholes as much in person as they are on social media, on a message board.
Right. When you actually have to sit there and listen to somebody who doesn't agree with you. And I don't mean this as a commentary for the right to the left. I mean it for everybody. The ability to sit there, hone your argument, listen to what the other person said, and debate them based on what they said, not based on what you heard on TV or on a bumper sticker or on a radio show. It's still a skill we have.
That's why I like to debate my wife only on Twitter, because I'm very good. I'm much better there than in real life, actually having to confront the issue.
Right. And that's what we've become. So if we could just get off of that stuff for a little while and talk to each other. And part of it is, we all live in these little bubbles, right? We literally physically live in bubbles where our neighbors generally share our views on things. So the idea that I'm bringing 6 Americans who generally speaking are not in the same place on stuff together, they all start a little bit tense and they look at it and you can see the anxiety. And by the end of it, it's not always better. But there's some sense of, I can do this. I can get through a conversation with somebody with whom I don't agree, with whom I will not agree in the end. That's the goal, right, Pete? The goal is not to sit and agree. That's not what pluralism is. Pluralism is the idea that we cannot agree on religion, on politics, on anything, and yet we can break bread together and we can be friends and we can talk.
But it's harder when we have issues that are so divisive, like science, when we talk about climate, vaccinations, and COVID. You have been talking to every single expert in the world when it comes to scientists, when it comes to government leaders, business leaders on your show. You've interviewed them all. So my question to you is what is most surprising by how the federal government and specifically the Trump administration has handled this? Because when the news what I ranted about the other day was I just can't believe that he has the access to a Dr. Fauci, a Dr. Birx, and all the best scientists at every university in America and across the country. And he literally brings on a guy now to run the COVID issue, relief, whatever he calls the board, that he saw on TV, who's a radiologist named Scott Atlas. What are you most surprised by or concerned by about the mishandling by the federal government, specifically the Trump administration, on all things COVID, given what you know?
I'm surprised by the number of people who cannot recognize that the emperor has no clothes. That's the hard part. I had a guy tell me this weekend in Arizona, look at this COVID thing. I mean, look at this problem. And I thought, wow, this is going somewhere. At least we're on the same page on this. And he said, we have an entire party trying to shut this country down. It's like, that was your takeaway from 215,000 people dead and, 8 million plus, 9 million people infected. Your takeaway is there's an entire party trying to shut America down, not the lies about the vaccines, not the fact that we have had no national policy whatsoever, either on testing, social distancing, or masking, which other countries have done. and have had much better results. That's the idea that I can see he's naked. How come you can't see he's naked?
Well, it's an effective narrative to say that the Democrats are tanking the economy to hurt his chances at re-election based on,
because that's his strong suit, right? The economy. That's what people believe. And again, I can show you all sorts of charts which indicate that Donald Trump was doing to the economy what anybody with half a brain should have and could have done, continued a growing economy. So that he tells you that African-American unemployment was at an all-time low. It was trending toward that all-time low. The stock market was trending up. It was hitting records before he became president. Then it hit records again after he became president. It's a crazy narrative, but more Americans actually believe it than not. People believe that he's really good for the economy. History will tell you Democratic presidents are actually better for the stock market, for instance, than not. But people believe this narrative. Fine. I'm fine with that. But how he's twisted into this partisan anti-science narrative that suggests that the harmful party in this is actually people who want to have people masked and social distanced and control this thing until we get a vaccine. We'll get a vaccine. We will solve this at some point. But until then, let's not kill more people unnecessarily. I don't understand how that became partisan. I don't understand it, because people of all political stripes have died in this country needlessly.
Well, I guess it became partisan. The best way to explain it is the way that cults work. It's the way cults work. It's not partisan. It's Trump's brand. It's not like conservative. There's so many conservative Republicans who are looking at the data and the science and wearing masks and socially distancing.
Yeah,
but
that's true.
And what I mean by cult brand is this idea that somehow wearing a mask illustrates your weakness, which is, I went on a whole rant on Twitter about, scuba divers should never wear tanks and firefighters should never use water to put out fires, pussies. I mean, it's like, this does not make you weak to trust and validate science. But I also think about how epidemiologists and experts and virologists never really ran a kind of a war game on what a virus, whatever they call it, would do if the president or the leaders didn't listen to them on the science. But
here's the problem, Pete. For years, media gave space to science deniers, mostly about climate, but before that it was about cigarettes, and it's been about oil, because it just felt like it was okay. And we set the table for this, because once you've ignored the science on cigarettes and you've ignored it on oil and climate, well, then what's the difference? This is just another virus. Somebody's got another opinion. Dr. Scott Atlas just has another view. And that's the problem. We set the stage for science deniers to have power. We should have been calling them out on it all the time. And that's us writ large, because there would be debates about, do you believe climate science is real or not? The climate issue is the granddaddy of this one. And I suppose cigarettes before climate was the granddaddy of that. But we have allowed this. We've allowed people to be on both sides of this issue. And guess what? Now we've got this.
And now we've got a Supreme Court Justice, Amy Coney Barrett, who says that she doesn't want to weigh in on it because the science is controversial.
It's a contentious issue. Can you believe that? In 2020, we're talking about it. It's not a contentious issue. No, and I'm really happy. I guess if you say it is, if somebody believes it's contentious, I suppose it is, but it shouldn't be.
I'm really happy that you have helped boost the work of Emily Atkin at Heated and a lot of other environmental and reporters on this. All right, last question, Ellie Velshi, is about the election itself. I don't love horse race stuff, or even necessarily polling and so on. But so let me just ask a larger question the way I see it. I also don't love making pronouncements or predictions, but it's the way I see it. Donald Trump had a decent shot at winning re-election pre-COVID. Post-COVID, it's done so much harm and damage to his ability to get reelected. But also, Hillary Clinton was the second least liked candidate ever to run. And Joe Biden is not Hillary Clinton. And we could unpack that, but there's no need to. That's just what the data points to. And finally, Donald Trump hasn't won any new voters. And the way I see it, it's quite possible that it's going to be a major landslide election for Joe Biden and right down the ticket. Everybody's got to get out of vote, all the caveats. We're very worried about any kind of hijinks and changing of votes and hacking of, what's going to happen on actual election day. But given how many votes have actually been cast, what's kind of your analysis of the campaign so far? Not to mention Joe Biden has like billions of dollars and Trump is losing money.
Smart people think he should have expanded his base, right? He always had, let's just start with some numbers, right? 25% of people, 26% of people last time they polled it, maybe it's 23, something like that, believe that Barack Obama was a Kenyan-born Muslim. As you know, I am the only Kenyan-born Muslim that you know, I believe. So you're starting with a base of people who believe nonsense, right? You've only got to add 15% of that to that thing. And he's done that with courts and religious conservatives and people who like low taxes and stuff like that. So you got Trump hanging around in the 35, 40% range. You would think he'd try to grow that to 50, right? But it might be a turnout game. I was in Arizona on Saturday, Sunday, Monday, Tuesday I left. And on Monday, he had rallies. He had one right where I was in Tucson. It was amazing, the turnout. I mean, people are coming out. So if you get 120% turnout amongst your 30-something odd base versus 80%, that Biden gets, I just want people to think about that people who supported Trump haven't given up. They haven't decided, oh, whatever, it was a fleeting moment. They want him. They know that there's no other Republican like him. There's no one else who will do that. So I would not discount the enthusiasm. As small as the group might be, they're wildly enthusiastic about Donald Trump. And I have encountered this. They're not prepared to listen to counter arguments. They're not listening to counter arguments. They're not even entirely exposed to them. They just believe that if it's coming from the media, it might be false. So I'm always wrong in predictions, and I don't make them. But I would say this to you. It does not look out there. And in fairness, I'm only in swing states. It does not look out there like it looks when I read the polling.
Looks closer?
Yep.
Where will you be this? We'll post on Thursday, the 22nd. So where will you be broadcasting your show from on MSNBC this weekend, 8 to 10 East? I'm
going to be in North Carolina. And I'm really focusing on the Carolinas broadly because it represents a lot of interests. There are religious conservatives, evangelicals in the Carolinas. There are African Americans who turned the tide for Joe Biden, right? It was after South Carolina that Joe Biden was the obvious Democratic candidate. African American voters came out for him. There's Jamie Harrison in South Carolina tackling Lindsey Graham and coming real close at this point with the campaign that's raised more money than anybody else's for a Senate race anywhere in the country. So the Carolinas are going to be really, really active. Look on election night for what happens in the South Carolina Senate race. Look at the North Carolina Senate race and look at whether or not Trump hangs on to North Carolina, because that is a state that is in play at the moment. So I'm going to be there, and I love the Carolinas, and it's going to be a great discussion.
Everybody should watch, and I really appreciate you joining me. As always, it's so great to just see your face and to talk to you, and keep up the great work. Everybody should be watching the show because you've been working your ass off, traveling all over the country, and keep it up, pal. Thank you.
Thanks, brother. Good to see you as always, and anytime.
At Ellie Velshi, can you tweet him and tell him that you appreciate him in that conversation with me, the way that we did it there? It's, I love listening to and watching him interview people and ask questions. He's a super smart guy, but I also love to hear him answer my questions in that case. So great that I get access to folks like this and get to have these long form conversations. And that's what hopefully you will subscribe for and pay for as little as $5. Sorry, I had to do a plug. I had to work a plug in there. I don't like doing it. But that's what I have to do now. I have to be a salesman for this podcast. Somebody's got to do it. Maybe I should have you guys do the voiceovers. Maybe I should hire listeners to make testimonials. That's not a bad idea. All right, let me get to my next guest, who is also excellent and who I so thoroughly enjoy reading and speaking to. And I've been talking with Tim Wise for 10 years. He is a prolific author and writer. You should get all of his books, which have made me understand and helped me understand so much about race in America. And I just love talking to him. He's an anti-racist author and writer and speaker, and you can support him on Patreon, and you can follow him on Twitter and buy his books. He's got a new book that is coming out on December 1st. It's called Dispatches from the Race War, essays on racial flashpoints, white denial, violence, and the manipulation of fear in America today. I highly recommend you get this book, available December 1st. You can pre-order it. Here's my conversation, which is always great, with Tim Wise. Let's just hit record because I've been talking to Tim Wise already for 10 minutes, and I'm like, a lot of this is gold, Tim Wise.
Oh, I can repeat it. That's the beauty of it.
Welcome back to Stand Up. Congratulations on your new book, which is out December 1st. Dispatches from the Race War. I've got is it a galley copy? I don't write books, but I get a lot of these, and I'm very excited to have yours.
So yeah, the galley copy is just the very unedited, uncorrected, filled with typos version of the book that we send to reviewers, because I guess we think reviewers don't care about bad grammar and punctuation. And then we will get the full one together. It should actually be available even before December 1, hopefully. So folks should keep their eyes out.
Well, I've been reading it. It's really impactful, as all of your work is. It says, in this collection of essays, renowned social justice advocate Tim Wise confronts American racism head-on, seen through the lens of major flashpoints. He traces a line from the bigoted pushback against Obama's presidency to the celebration of white nationalism by the Trump regime. How much do you you cover a lot of time here? These are a collection of your essays from, say, the last 10 years?
Well, it literally the first piece after the introduction is the night of the Obama election in 2008. So it's a 12-year retrospective of sort of, and the reason I call it Dispatches from the Race War, number one, I think we've been in a race war for 400 years, really. In this on this piece of land that we call the U.S., but certainly the last 12 has seen this new iteration of racial tension, conflict, white racial anxiety, pushback, white rage, backlash, whatever term we use. And I'm sort of tracing the arc of that from that Obama period, which was the supposed post-racial America, right, to what we obviously see now as this sort of overt white nationalist push. And I'm trying to draw the connection between that pushback against Obama and sort of where we are now. So even though these are essays that were written over a 12-year period, they all sort of retain the present day, sort of relevance.
It is out December 1st. Everybody can pre-order it now. It's so good. Dispatches from the Race War, Tim Wise. I'll link to it in the show notes. People say this phrase race war. It really triggers me. It always has. I remember back in college when my closest friend, who's a black guy and hated white people, Taekwon, he knows who he is. We actually just spoke the other day, and I should remind him about this. He told me there was going to be a race war, and then called me a white devil. Anyway, and then
you beat him up just to prove that he was right.
No, right? My main reason of being friends with him is because he was giant and no one messed with me. There you go. But I've always hated it. I remember, and I'm not making a joke about him or that. When he said it, I remember just wanting to cry. I'm like, if he's saying it, and that was in 1996. I mean, I've been hearing this phrase. What does it mean, race war? And why do you say we've been in one in this country for as long as this place has existed?
Well, I agree. The way that your friend mentioned it would be tragic and horrific. And I don't necessarily mean it the way that he might have. I tell a story at the beginning of the book. It's in the intro, actually, to sort of set the tone of why I use that term. And it's a story from 1994. So when I was 25 years old, shortly before I turned 26, I'd gone to a family reunion in Memphis. And one of my aunts, who I love dearly, a lovely old lady, but she's since passed. But she came up to me. She knew what I did. I'd been doing anti-racism work for about 4 years at that point after getting out of college. She comes up to me and she sits me down and sort of looks around the embassy suites in Germantown, the community of Memphis. And she says, and she had a very heavy Southern accent, and she sounded like Brenda Vaccaro, which will mean nothing to any listener who's under about 70.
Tim?
But, very lots of raspy sort of. So she says, Tim, and she could turn my name into 3 syllables. It's 3 letters, but she could, she's like, Tim, do you think we're ever going to have a race war? Because she could also make WOA a 2-syllable word. And I looked at her and I'm like, that's got to be the weirdest question. She's looking around like a race WOA. And I was trying to figure out what to say. And I didn't want to even have the conversation because my mom and I that day had gone down to what is now the National Civil Rights Museum at the Lorraine Motel where Dr. King was murdered. Mm. And so I'm not in the mood to have this conversation. I just want to sit with my thoughts. But she really wanted to know about the race war, Tim. So I said, well, if by that you mean marauding bands of black people torching Whitey's neighborhood? The answer is no, because I can assure you, if that were their plan, where we're sitting right now in the embassy suites in Germantown, Memphis, would have been torched a really long time ago. But I said, I think we've already been in one. We've been in one for, at that point, 375 years, since 1619. So if by that you mean, are we ever going to have that? I said, it's like, it's like asking in the middle of January when the snow is piling up in 6-foot drifts and the temperature drops to 20 below, is winter coming? Yeah, it's sort of here, sweetheart. So I said that to her, and then she was like, oh, okay. And then she got up and went and played bridge, because
she felt safer once you gave her that response.
Right. So my point was, we've been in one. And the thing that when white folks ask about race wars, usually it is about, are they going to fight back? Or, are they going to actually try to make things even? Like, because we got on our licks, but we were thinking they were just going to take them, And I think what we're mad about is folks are fighting back, and they're done with this lopsided race war of white supremacy that's been going on for 400 years. And so we got to figure out, maybe we need to redesign the teams, and some of us get on team justice real quick for practical and moral reasons, because this isn't going to end well if we don't.
Do you think Cory Booker is going to come in and destroy the suburbs? Because I think that's what your aunt was getting at. I think she didn't know who was going to be the leader, but apparently it's Cory Booker.
Yeah, I'm sure Cory Booker is going to come in, and he's going to find a vegan restaurant to eat at, because we know he's vegan, right? And he's going to eat, and then he's going to burn the whole neighborhood.
Well, the really funny thing about that whole thing where Trump was like, Cory Booker's going to lead it, and a lot of white women in the suburbs were like, send him to my house first, because he is such a stud to a lot of people, men and women. It's like
Trump's instincts are real genius. Like at least before. During the Obama years, they would say things like, it's the new Black Panthers, which is like 30 guys, right? But they would say it's the new Black Panthers. And then Trump's like, let's just say Cory Booker, because he's intimidating to white people as well, apparently. So,
he's also apparently sexy as hell to a lot of white people. So I wanted to ask you about this. I guess it wasn't the biggest news in the world, but when I talk to people I know in the federal government, it's pretty big news to them. The President of the United States, a couple of weeks ago, and he's done this now a couple of times, I guess, signed a couple of executive orders that instructed people in the federal government to stop doing diversity training. And this is the kind of training that you're brought into companies, corporations, universities, organizations to talk about. This is the kind of talk that you give and the kind of work that you've been doing and touching on for much of your career. So what is that? Why is it important? And why was that a big deal?
Well, first, let's just be clear that Donald Trump just signs executive orders so he can do that crazy signature that looks like an earthquake chart. I mean, I think it's all just sort of, I think he just, it's just like he likes to see his own name in very large letters, and so I think he just does it for performative reasons. But a couple things. I mean, the executive orders would essentially ban any trainings or seminars. There are two of them. One in government itself, government agencies. If those trainings or seminars talk about systemic racism, use that phrasing. Talk about privilege, particularly white privilege. Talk about critical race theory, or if they're rooted in critical race theory, which I would pay any reporter to ask Kayleigh McEnany to please define what critical race theory is, and just refuse to leave the press room until she answers it. Or ask Trump, same thing, and just keep asking the same question, but they won't, and they don't know the answers, of course. They also he then issued a second executive order with another crazy signature that says that if you're a private entity that contracts with the federal government, meaning a large number of businesses, you might not have a big contract, but if you've got even $50,000 worth of a government deal or some kind of contract, could be to deliver envelopes, could be anything. You're not going to be able to have a training. If you're a college or university and you, of course, receive federal money and have contracts, you're not going to be able to have seminars either. Now, the good news about this two things. Number one, Donald Trump, almost 4 years in office, still doesn't know how executive orders actually work. You don't just pass shit, write it out on the Resolute desk, hand it to somebody, and it gets enforced. You actually have to write enforcement mechanisms for executive orders. Those enforcement mechanisms have not been written unless they did them, like unless Stephen Miller stayed up all night for the last 2 weeks writing them. They haven't been written. It's just sitting there toothless. So number one, it's not real. Number two, it's blatantly unconstitutional. You can't say the following 7 words in a training with the federal government. You cannot impose those kinds of content-based restrictions on a training. And if you did impose them, all of us are smart enough, we'll just come up with other phrases.
And to be clear, they did, right? They banned certain phrases and words. Is that right?
Well, that's what they were saying. White privilege, systemic racism, critical race theory. I mean, the thing is, though, none of us who do this actually get up and go, OK, y'all, this is where we pivot to critical race theory. So get out your notes. We're going to talk about critical race theory. Critical race theory is a sort of way of looking at race in America. It's not a thing where you use the terms. So if you do want to impose those restrictions, I assure you that we are clever enough to come up with other terms for white privilege, for systemic racism, and for critical race theory. And we'll just do the same thing. It's completely unenforceable. It's unconstitutional. The only reason he's doing it, other than signing things that he likes to sign, is that he knows it's a way to say to his base, these evil liberals are coming for you. They came for your statues. They're coming for your heroes. And we're going to make America great again by getting rid of all this, this liberal stuff. And so it's just a way to signal to the people who are already on his side that he's on their side. It's not real. And anybody who allows themselves to be intimidated by this and actually folds up and decides, oh, we got to cancel these trainings because he's going to yank our funding. You need to literally grow a spine, because there's no way that this can happen. Even if Trump were to win re-election, they cannot enforce this. And I wish somebody would stand up to this guy rather than folding the way the intel communities do. We just learned today we can't talk to him about Russia because he might get mad and throw things into Oval Office. These are CIA agents. These are people who literally assassinate people, and they're afraid of the president of the United States might yell at them, say mean things, and throw them out of his office. Yeah, and some people are scared of rich white men for reasons that absolutely astound me.
Yeah, it's a great point, because he's just a paper tiger. He's not actually a scary guy. I mean, he does. I guess the scariest thing he does do, and this is real, he does go after people publicly on Twitter and then put them in actual harm's way. Gretchen Whitmer, my friend Ali Velshi, and so many other people. I mean, that kind of thing can be a real, because he unleashes the crazy on people with his Twitter account. But
look, I get it. I mean, Tucker Carlson, who's essentially a Trump sycophant for all intent and purpose, went in on me on CNN on Fox one night, and the next day I'm getting death threats and calls. So I get it. Like, I realize that the people are out there who can be turned loose by people like Donald Trump. But if somebody in the intel community would just simply, whenever you stand up, this is the guy in second grade that tried to bully you in the playground and was calling you names and spitting on you. And then when you hit him in the face, he went away and told his daddy and decided to sue your parents. Like, he's not going to actually fight back. He is a paper tiger in every sense of the word. And why people are scared of him, it just goes to show how supine we have learned to be in this country, that we're just so afraid that, it's the same reason that back in the 80s when I was in college, I remember people wouldn't sign petitions for things because I was always getting petitions signed because I'm nuts like that. I would just, ever since I was like 7, I was just like, here, sign my petition or whatever. I want to be emancipated from my parents. And nobody would sign it, right? And they'd say, oh, I don't want my name on a list. The hell? Like, people are living in fear of somebody knowing what you think about something. At some point, this is how we got in this spot. This is how we end up with Donald Trump. That's how you end up with an authoritarian, is when you decide to relinquish all of your agency to whoever the hell the head of state is. It's a little bit.
Well, what do you say then to, I actually think this is legitimate. I don't defend it in any way, but I do think it's a legitimate point to say that if a Republican congressman or sitting Republican senator, at least maybe not this year, but in any time before this since Trump has been president, if they even lightly criticize or disagree with him and he finds out, he will go after them publicly in speeches on Twitter. And very likely they will lose. They will lose support, and they could potentially get a primary challenger and lose their seat. And let me just recap that by saying it more simply. If you go against Trump and you're a sitting Republican Congress member, you could very well lose your seat. Recently, we saw Senator Ben Sasse of Missouri go after Trump on an audio recording. You can hear it, and he pulls no punches. He's very critical of Trump and calls him all kinds of, he's just very critical of him. You've seen John Cornyn, senator from Texas, who's in a tough reelection, start to pull away from the president. What do you say to these Republicans who are in office who are now going after the president or who didn't before? Because you've been tweeting a little bit about that. I think you're locked and loaded for this answer.
I mean, the whole point of public service is public service. It isn't about job security. If you want to be a politician, an elected official, by definition, you are assuming that every 2 years or 4 years or 6 years, you could be removed. So it's time for people to grow a spine. I'm sure there were folks, there were plenty of people during the period of enslavement who I'm sure were like, ooh, if I speak out against this, I might lose my job in the South Carolina state legislature. Well, at what point do we make a moral decision? If the Republicans like Ben Sasse actually had any courage, if these people actually had any courage at all, they would stand up, they would risk their jobs, or they would stand or fall on principle. Let the QAnon lunatics take the party over and watch the party die, because the rest of the country is prepared to send those folks packing. So at some point, if you're Ben Sasse, you got to say, look, let's take the long view. If we believe in a responsible Republican Party that has responsible conservative principles, then we're going to have to be prepared to get shellacked for the next however long. That's what they did after Goldwater. They went back to the drawing board, and 16 years later, they were taking over the government. I certainly don't want them to do that, but at least those folks had the courage of their convictions. At least Goldwater was able to say, like, hey, this is my extremism in the defense of liberty is no vice. Take it or leave it. And folks were like, yeah, we're going to leave it. And then 16 years later, they came back again and unfortunately were able to, capture the seats of government. But that's the kind of principled decision that political leaders ought to be engaged in, rather than this sort of transactional, well, maybe if I stay, I can rein in his worst instincts. Give me one example of where that has worked. One example of some adult staying in the room and helping Trump stop throwing shit on the wall. Like, he's still doing the same thing no matter who sticks with him. So at what point do you stop getting played and stop getting used? Trump, his whole life, has relied on people doing this for fear of his retaliatory power. And it is absolute and utter nonsense. He is a toothless paper tiger who needs to be brought down, whether that's from inside or outside. One way or the other, he has to go.
What about the debate the other night on NBC where Savannah Guthrie asked him again to denounce white supremacy? I thought that was a terrible. I was actually pretty critical of a lot of the way that she handled that, even though she got a lot of credit for doing it. They should have had that town hall opposite of Joe Biden's NBC and so on. But when they ask him to denounce white supremacy, I think that's a stupid thing to do. He has denounced it several times, and he says that I've denounced it a lot of times. I've denounced it. I'm not okay with it. White supremacy equals bad. Okay. The question should be, and he has been asked that, but there should be a specific question about white supremacy, about systemic racism. He has been asked about that, but you can move the ball down the road and ask him a little bit differently and watch him drown in his own words. How did you think she handled that part of it? And I also want to ask you, the question about QAnon and the fact that he retweets crazy conspiracy theories like that there was a bin Laden body double. I think those questions should have and could be handled a lot differently. And so I'm criticizing not only her, but anybody who has access to the president and is asking the wrong question.
I think she did a good job on the QAnon piece and the body double piece and all that stuff. But I think you make a great point about the white supremacy piece. I mean, first of all, notice whenever he does condemn it, he always then has to throw in Antifa, always has to throw in the left as well, which again, this is sort of like saying, Hitler was bad, but those people that rose up in the Warsaw Ghetto, now let's remember they were violent too, right? Like, there is this sort of equivalizing, which is still worth calling out. But I think the question to ask him, and this has been since Charlottesville, is to say, listen, Mr. President, we know that you say that you condemn white supremacy, but do you find it interesting, or are you curious as to why so many racists think you're racist? If you're not a white supremacist, if you're not, sympathetic to their views, why are they all just wrong? Do they not understand? And if so, can you set the record straight? Would you look at them right now and say, I don't want your support. I don't want your vote. I don't want my name in your mouth. That's what a responsible president would say. And he won't. Even Ronald Reagan actually did say at one point that he didn't want the support of the Klan. Now, Reagan had his own racist history that we could get into. But the point is, even he was willing to say, I don't want your vote. I don't want your support. Donald Trump could do that. But the problem is Donald Trump's ego and character is rooted in liking whoever likes him. So if you remind him, the Nazis, they sort of dig you, man. He'd probably be like, well, they're patriotic Americans. I hear they like me. What can I tell you? So that's the way to handle it, is to ask him why the racists think that he is one of them. Or is he not making it clear enough? Are they just completely mistaken? That would be one way to get at it. In addition, of course, to asking, what do you think about the idea? Like the rumor that he has long sort of believed, that, not just rumors, but people that have worked with him who have said all the racist things that he has said about black people. Doesn't want black people counting his money, doesn't want black people building his buildings, doesn't want indigenous people to have casinos, thinks that Jews ought to be counting all the money, all this stuff. Why don't you just stick on that and say, how is that not white supremacy? How is that not the belief that white people are generally superior? Mr. President, do you think white people are generally more intelligent than black people? Because we know he thinks the answer to that is yes. We know that. And we know that he believes in sort of the genetics of intelligence and the connection between that and whiteness. There are so many people in his history who have said that, who have worked for him, who have talked about that. That's the thing. You hang him with his own words, as opposed to asking these sort of easy questions like, did you beat your wife last night kind of questions.
Yeah, well, every time he is asked about that, he does do exactly what you said. Pretty much every time, where he pivots from white supremacy and denouncing that lightly to Antifa. But what about Antifa? And so does his attorney general, Bill Barr. They point to Antifa as being this equivalent or even a worse threat to national security in terms of domestic terrorism. And you and I have been talking for over 10 years about this. And there are lots of people in the Department of Homeland Security and national security, and obviously scholars and people at the Southern Poverty Center, Law Center, who have been identifying the threat that white supremacy and anti-government right-wing white nationalist types pose. And it's far worse and more pervasive than that of foreign extremists. We know that now. So my question to you is, when he pivots from denouncing white supremacy to Antifa, to me, Antifa is fairly new. It is mostly basically property damage. They are not an organized group. They are not everywhere, and they are not that, frankly, influential. And and what they are against is fascism and capitalism.
Look, Antifa, I will go further than that. Antifa, first of all, has been around for a while. It was around in Europe for many, many years as a sort of organized ideology. Decades ago, even in the 80s and in the 90s, there were Antifa organizations here in the United States. Anti-racist action was probably the biggest. It has existed for many, many years. And until recently, there has been no one even associated with Antifa that has been accused of a murder of a political adversary, the one that just happened, and it's questionable what the details are. And we won't know because apparently the administration ordered a hit on this guy. And we don't actually know what happened, if he was being arrested or if they were just like, screw it, let's just murder him right there extrajudicially. But what we do know is that Antifa ideological organizations have been active in this country, even if you don't assume that my grandfather was one when he fought the Nazis. Like, we could go back and say that was Antifa. Right. But even if we don't get cheeky and say that, Antifa, as we know it now, anti-fascist, anti-racist organizations in this country have been active for at least 35 years. And there's one body that you can lay on them. But with far right organizations, the DHS, every private and or governmental agency that looks into it can give you hundreds of bodies just in the last 5 or 6 years. Thousands of terrorist attacks going back many decades, or at least several hundred terrorist attacks going back many decades. So it isn't a both sides kind of thing. Second point, probably 80% of what Antifa does is not even street demonstrations at all. The most important stuff they do is actually investigative journalism. They're the ones who are finding out people who are connected to neo-Nazi organizations and far-right organizations. This is the work that journalists ought to be doing, but they don't. And so most of what Antifa folks, and I know plenty of folks who have been active in Antifa, I consider several people who are involved in that ideological movement, again, because it's not an organization, and the organizations that operate under the banner of Antifa often disagree with one another. I know plenty of those folks. Most of what they do is research. Most of what they do is investigation and then exposing people who are connected to white supremacists and neo-Nazis. That's not objectionable activity. That's important activity. The stuff that takes place in the streets is maybe 15% of what folks in the anti-fascist ideological community are doing, and 90% of that is not property damage either. And the part that is physical violence is almost always defensive violence. You can see that in Charlottesville. You can see that in most instances around the country. That doesn't mean it's always retaliatory, and it doesn't mean that I always agree with the tactics that various Antifa folks employ, practically speaking. But to suggest that it's a terrorist threat or a terrorist movement on par or even in the same universe as the fascists that they are fighting is like saying, well, here's a group over here that believes America should be purged of people of color and Jews. And here's a group over here who's trying to stop that. And we should make them considered to be equivalent. That's absolutely morally ridiculous. Makes no sense. The fact that people fall for it, again, suggests that they don't understand Antifa and they don't understand FA. They don't understand what fascism is. And
then again, the false equivalency that so many folks in media make and in Congress make, in that they somehow are influential, that Joe Biden is Antifa, that Bernie Sanders is Antifa, or whatever they might say. I mean, or in the media supportive of. It's preposterous when on the right, you've got plenty of people in Congress and on TV with millions of viewers or radio talking all of the time, spouting this white supremacist bullshit. I mean, right. in the rank and file of Congress.
Right.
Voting, creating policy.
Right. Where is the Antifa congressional candidate that is tantamount to the QAnon? And I don't even want to put them in the same universe either, because to say that Antifa and QAnon are parallel is absurd. But that would be like, if you had Antifa soldiers, so to speak, who were flooding into the Democratic Party ranks, then you could see this argument they're making, even though it would still be wrong. But they're not. I mean, the idea that they're all behind Biden, it'll be interesting to see. Most of the people I know that are in various Antifa contingencies, it's the question of, are they going to vote at all? They're not into Joe Biden. They weren't really into Bernie Sanders. Right. These are not folks who believe in the normal sort of contours of party politics in the United States. That's not what they're about. They obviously are on the left politically, but they don't see the Democratic Party as a left party. They don't even see it as a remotely progressive party. So some of them may end up voting for the Democrat, but it's certainly not because they're down with Joe Biden. They're not riding with Biden in Antifa, I assure you.
I want to ask you about something that regular listeners have heard me beat this drum a lot lately, because I've been pretty frustrated with, the kind of the Kanyes and the Ice Cubes and some of these other influential black folks that have big followings that don't just seem to pay attention to news and politics and the actual struggle of black folks in terms of policy. So you and I have talked, and you've written a lot about opportunity, about laws that have limited opportunity, from healthcare to education to jobs. Obviously, the prison, the school to prison pipeline, the drug war, all of these things that go way back. The Jim Crow laws, new Jim Crow. But what I've been really focused on lately is trying to talk more about simple restoring voting rights. Can you take me through how you would speak about the movement, the civil rights movement of the 60s, led by Dr. King and John Lewis and others, and what they achieved, and then what the Supreme Court did, in 2010 when they gutted voting rights, and how Democrats have tried to restore what the courts removed legislatively, but Republicans hasn't, because let's not argue about what policies are best for black folks until we agree that you have to restore voting rights. Talk to me a little bit about that journey and why, in my opinion, that's the thing. That's where you start and end, voting rights.
Right. Well, look, the civil rights movement, probably signature achievement of that movement was the Voting Rights Act. I mean, the Fair Housing Act was very important, but it didn't have enforcement teeth for 20 years. The Civil Rights Act is opening up the ability to actually keep those other rights enforced by virtue of who was elected is a critical underlying thing. And unfortunately, what happens is the Supreme Court, as you noted, essentially removed certain or struck down certain sections of, invalidated certain sections of the Voting Rights Act, and essentially said, well, we're not going to require what was called pre-clearance anymore. So it used to be that if you were a jurisdiction that was directly under the control of the Voting Rights Act, which meant that you were in the South, or there were a handful of districts outside of the South as well that were covered because of a history of proven discrimination in ballot access. You had, if you wanted to make any change of any real substance in the way that you did voting, you had to get it cleared by the Justice Department. You had to run it by them to make sure that it wasn't discriminatory. And essentially what the Supreme Court said is, yeah, we don't need to do that anymore, because, you know, there's so many black people now who are voting, and there's so many black people getting elected. Why? My goodness, they said, look at Mississippi. Mississippi has more black elected officials than any state in the United States. And so it's working, and you don't need the Voting Rights Act to have pre-clearance. Well, Ruth Bader Ginsburg famously made maybe one of the most, you know, insightful arguments that I've ever heard any Supreme Court justice make about anything, when she said to get rid of pre-clearance in the Voting Rights Act because it's working is like walking around in a rainstorm, not getting wet, and then saying you don't need your umbrella anymore. And so you throw the umbrella away, right? That was what pre-clearance was. And as soon as they got rid of it, you saw jurisdictions begin to try to impose changes that were going to disproportionately affect who? Black folks. So it was, you know, removing machines in various communities, not having enough voting machines. It was photo ID requirements, even though there is no evidence of substantial in-person voting fraud. It was, you know, all these things that the courts said in a state like North Carolina were surgically precise, intended to disenfranchise black folks. In Texas, you have, you know, going to court, you have the state of Texas saying, well, we're not trying to disenfranchise black people. We're just trying to disenfranchise Democrats. Like, they literally said this in court. Like, we're trying to keep Democrats from voting. Well, the fact that Democrats in the state of Texas are disproportionately black and brown ought to be enough, and under pre-clearance would have been enough to say, yeah, you can't do that. But now it is enough that you can get away with that. And so what we have is we have one side of the aisle, those on the right, who want fewer people to vote. And they really don't make any bones about this. During the Tea Party movement, Judson Phillips, who was a big Tea Party activist, Ted Nugent, who I hear plays guitar, but I mean, who knows? These guys were literally openly saying that we should restrict the franchise to property owners who don't receive any public assistance of any kind, any government money. This was something they openly said. So these are people who want fewer folks to vote because they believe in the divine right of kings, and they believe in this sort of elitist system. Now, I would love personally for Ted Nugent to have to take a history test in order to vote. I'm fairly confident he'd never cast a ballot again. But this is the kind of thing that they openly advocate, whereas those on the other side of the aisle are saying, listen, I want everybody to vote. I even want those QAnon fools to vote, because I think everybody ought to have a right to vote. Now, if there's something comes up that day, like there's a circus they want to go to instead, cool, they should do that. But I want them to have the right to vote. I wish everybody would vote, but the right doesn't want them to, because they know that if everyone in this country were able to cast a vote, they would never hold power again, because their views are not popular. Their views are not believed by the majority. Now, they might say, well, we don't want majority tyranny. Well, what we have now is minority tyranny numerically. So we have a constitution that tries to protect us against actual tyranny. But if you're going to say we're going to let the minority rule the majority, certainly that is even less just than having the majority rule the minority. And that's what happens when you gut voting rights, which is what we've done for several years in this country.
Oh, well, there's my excerpt that I'll take from this interview. That's such a great answer. But the only thing I would add to that or follow up with is, you don't want majority tyranny, but you do want everybody to be able to vote if they're a citizen. You don't want to limit voting. And however, you know, democracy ends up at the end of the vote is how it ends up, but you can't limit people from voting. You can't draw lines around a district to make sure all the people that think this way, that have this socioeconomic class, are going to be in this part of that district. Gerrymandering was what I'm talking about. I mean, these kinds of things limit democracy. And so that's where I want to go next. I mean, what could this country be, Tim Wise, if everybody had similar access, if everybody had similar representation, if D.C. and Puerto Rico, for example, became states? What would that mean for democracy in the United States of America?
Well, it would mean that we might actually attain some version of it. And here's what it would also mean. I mean, right now, some of the anti-democratic elements of our system, it isn't just that it harms low income and working class folks or black and brown folks or LGBTQ folks. It actually really disempowers a broad swath of Americans, including some that are pretty conservative. So, for instance, think about the anti-democratic nature of the Electoral College. You know, we talk about that a lot, and a lot of people are questioning, but think about it. Right now, so if you're a conservative in California, ain't nobody trying to get your vote. If you're a liberal or a progressive or a leftist like me in Tennessee, ain't nobody trying to get my vote. So we're being ignored. If you're black in the deep South, you might as well still not have the right to vote at all, right? The 13th Amendment, it doesn't even matter that that's even on the books, in the sense that you're black if you're in Alabama or you're Mississippi, because the Electoral College says you ain't gonna win. So really, if let's say I'm a right winger in California, I'm one of the 7 that haven't fled the state in fear, whatever. I want you to come for my vote, but you're not going to. And so I think if we really want everybody to be included, and candidates and politicians to have to compete for all the votes, to have to speak to everybody, right, then we have to change the anti-democratic features of our system. And the good news about that, all these folks that are like, oh, if we get rid of the Electoral College, the liberal states will run roughshod over Nebraska or something. No, what'll happen is candidates, whether they're Democrats, Republicans, Greens, Libertarian, whatever, will have to figure out how to appeal to the broadest possible overall base of people, which means you're not going to get extreme policies. You're just not, because they're not going to be popular, right? If you've got somebody that's doing like really crazy right-wing stuff, and then someone that's like talking about like, you know, Stalinist labor camps, that's going to appeal to like 37 people. They're going to have to figure out ways to work together. That's going to be better, not just for black and brown folks, not just for marginalized groups. That's going to be better for everybody. But, you know, the people who are afraid of democracy are the same people who were always afraid of it. And that's how we get the terminology of the right and left from France during the revolution. The people on the right wanted the royalists to remain in power, and the people on the left did not. Now, we understand that those, you know, on the left, the terror was not a pretty moment. And obviously things got nasty with the guillotine. I'm not advocating bringing it back, although there are some people on Twitter I hear who do. Not me. But I will tell you this, if you do not figure out a way to preserve or at least attain democracy, don't be surprised when the guillotines come, because that's what happens when you suppress the will of the people over and over and over again. That's not a threat. That's just a historical analysis of what happens when we continually suppress the people who make up the majority of a society. It doesn't last forever.
All right, my final big question to you here, Tim, is when we hear folks complaining or saying that they're the forgotten ones, when they talk about, you know, economic anxiety is why people voted for Trump and so on, it's very easy for us to be like, no, it's racism. And I actually hear some of those people who reject that. I talk to some of those people, and I think that we need to be a little bit more nuanced with our answer. And I know that you are and I am, but we can often be flip. But basically, I want to tell you what I say, and then I want you to give me the more intellectual explanation. But recently, I had a guy say something like this to me, and I said to him, listen, no one is saying that white people don't have horrific struggle and problems. And I went on to list mine. The last year of my life has been really challenging after losing my corporate job and health insurance. My daughter had some minor health issues. My dad had serious health issues. I've dealt with depression and anxiety. My marriage has struggled at times. There is no doubt that white people have all kinds of issues with income, with jobs, with emotional stability, with family relationships, with you name it. We have serious problems. But the way I see it is, but at least I get a seat at the counter. I still have it easier for the most part than most people of color in general. But furthermore, we don't need to pit each other against each other because we can all benefit from similar policies when it comes to healthcare, when it comes to education, universal pre-K, etc. But right. That's my more nuanced answer. What's your more nuanced answer when people do bring up this? Because there's economic anxiety. Absolutely, if I'm a coal miner and I've lost my job, these are real things. But
couple things. I mean, your point is a good one. Look, there were poor people in Appalachia even during segregation and enslavement. It doesn't change the fact that on balance, it paid to be white in America, number one. But the more nuanced point that I would make is this. The reason that the economic anxiety of white people is so catastrophic to us when we experience it, other than the fact that it sucks to be out of work, it sucks to lose your job, it sucks to not be able to pay your bills, is that we live in a country that promised us that wouldn't happen to us. We live in a country that promised white people, if you work hard, if you play by the rules, that won't be your experience. See, black and brown folks knew it was bullshit. Black and brown folks knew they could work hard every day and not get anywhere. But white folks were like, no, if I just work hard, I'll be better off than my daddy, and my kids will be better off than me. And then we learned what black and brown folks already knew. So what I'm suggesting is the economic anxiety is real, but it's happening against a backdrop of racial promises that were made to us, which are not always capable of being fulfilled. We ought to be angry, but not at black folks, not at brown folks, at the rich white folks that lied to us about the system they set up. That's the first point. The second point is that white pain is in part because of black and brown pain. What do I mean by that? Well, think about it. There's a study that was done several years ago from, I think, the Kennedy School at Harvard that found that the number one most highly correlated reason why white folks reject larger safety nets, things like universal health care, things like nutrition assistance and other income support programs. The reason that white folks give most often for rejecting those things is the fear that those people over there, meaning black folks in particular, are going to abuse the programs. What's the irony? A lot of those white folks need those programs, right? And so you get a guy like Jonathan Metzl, friend of mine, professor here at
Dying of Whiteness. Yeah, great. Yeah.
Right. Dying of Whiteness. He talks to a white guy who's poor. He's in subsidized housing, white dude, 42 years old or something, dying of cirrhosis of the liver, has no health care. Jonathan says to him, hey, man, do you have health care? He goes, no. He says, well, why don't you get on ACA? I mean, it's not perfect, but it's something. Your pre-existing condition will be covered. And the white guy says, I would rather die than be on Obamacare because that's for welfare cheats and illegal immigrants. His words, not mine. That dude is now dead. He's dead. So what was he saying? I would rather die than be associated with those people. He is elevating his racial caste, as Isabel Wilkerson calls it in her new book of that name, which is a brilliant book. He's elevating his racial caste identity above his actual class interests. So do I feel that guy's pain? Absolutely. And I would love for it to have been alleviated. But the only way it's going to be alleviated is if he decides that his skin color is not more valuable than the beating of his heart. And as long as white people still continue to believe that our skin is worth more than our lives, then we're going to get exactly what we deserve. And that's what's happening in this country right now.
Great answer. I wish you would have been more articulate in today's conversation.
I've had a lot of coffee.
Is that what you're drinking? Is it iced coffee that you're drinking?
Yeah, you thought it was bourbon and Coke or something.
No, I didn't think it was alcohol. I don't think that you drink alcohol. We're talking in the morning, but I did think you were drinking soda.
No, it's iced coffee. Yeah.
I feel better.
I have like 4 of these a day. It's probably why I have blood pressure that's a little higher than it ought to be. But, you know.
It's well, whatever you're drinking, give me some of that. Thank you very much for joining me, as always, pal.
Hey, man, absolutely. Thank you.
Tim Wise, everybody, at Tim Jacob Wise on the Twitter. Get the new book. Follow him on Twitter. Support him on Patreon. Check out his podcast. I'm always so glad when he is able to join me here on mine. And before I wrap it up, I want to share one more thing with you, and that is The Late Show with Stephen Colbert. Last night, right before I was putting the podcast to bed at night, tucking it in and saying goodnight, I saw a tweet from Kim in Iowa, who is an awesome, outstanding member of the stand-up community, about Stephen Colbert's monologue and how he basically laid out the choices for America by commenting on the worst thing that he at least thinks that the Trump and many others that the Trump administration is responsible for, and that is, of course, their horrific, arcane human rights crime of child separation that, by the way, captured the entire globe's outrage. Here's Colbert with a kind of closing argument, which I think is great. Glad I saw Kim mentioning this on Twitter. She, by the way, is on Twitter at K Von Y Borg. Kim is great on Twitter, KVONYBORG, and I'd love to get her some more followers. All right, here it is. And man, I'm proud to say I opened for every night for almost 6 years, Stephen Colbert on the CBS Late Show.
So, Trump says and does a lot of dumb things, but we should never let his stupidity overshadow the fact that he's also a heartless monster who must be driven from office and eventually dragged in manacles before The Hague. Because of all the horrible things he and his administration have done, perhaps the horriblest is their family separation policy on the border. And we got some chilling news yesterday in a court filing. You see, last year, a federal judge ordered the government to reunite parents and children that had been separated by the Trump administration. And, well, the appointed lawyers just came back to him and explained that the parents of 545 children separated at the U.S. border still can't be found. We have 2 weeks to decide what kind of country this is going to be. Either this inhumane behavior is going to be punished by the voters, or just change the Statue of Liberty to read, give me your tired, your poor, and $500,000 in unmarked bills if you want to see the kids again. Think about the sheer number here. 545 kids. That's not a child on a milk carton. That's the whole dairy aisle. And yet there are still people who haven't made up their minds. There are still people who are going to vote for him. And I know that people vote on a lot of different issues. But now that we know that these children were stolen from their parents and cannot be returned because of the negligence of this administration, that is one of the things you're voting on. You can't say you don't know.
All right, there's a lot more to that, but I don't want to run up against a copyright violation, so I'm not sure how much of this stuff I'm ever allowed to play. No one has contacted me and say I've done anything wrong yet, so I'll continue to share these clips with you here on the program. I think a little bit of a roundup of news and clips is always interesting to hear, and I'm able to do that for you each and every day here on Stand Up. All right, now to play us out is singer-songwriter John Carroll, former member of Starland Vocal Band, and he has written songs for some of the greatest artists that you know. John has been a longtime listener and supporter of mine and the show that I've been doing. I've gotten to know him, had several conversations with him, and he's often there at our hangouts saying very thoughtful things, and has often played us out at our hangouts. He's a magical guy. He is online at johncarroll.org, at jdcarroll88 on Twitter. I love to follow him. He's very active on social media. He's a great guy, musician, writer, arranger, performer, and this is Everything Costs More When You're Poor, John Carroll and Brave Soul. Taking us out. You're not alone, folks.
Everything costs more when you're poor. There ain't no deeper discount at the big box bargain store. The man downtown looks you up and down like he never did before. It costs more, 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 more. Everyone's impressed when you're the best. Makes them look real good to see you wear them well, I guess. And that movie queen gonna make the scene in her freeze-act posing dress. It costs less, less, ah yes. Don't mean to be too blunt, you got to pay up front. Yes, you do. Collateral is all about that thing you need, not want. So cut the bait or sit and wait. On the ball or punt.
May I help you, sir?
Was there anything else you want? That cracking down. love sing.